Hi, in this video I want to mention something that I mentioned in my last video, and it's no one person has any impact actually. Like I mentioned before, it's the mechanism that we're in, it's the reality that we're in, the universe that we're in. I've mentioned this in passing in so many videos, and I have actually probably made a video or two on its own, but I can't remember, so I'm going to make another one. So when I'm saying this, we're victims of circumstance. We don't really have an effect on anything, and we're just the tools being moved around by the circumstance of this deterministic universe. Now let's use that, and we can say, let's use that as a starter of this question, or whatever it may be, thought experiment, that yes, we are living in a deterministic universe, and there's nothing we can do to change except the illusion of change, of feeling like we could have changed something in the past, because that's the only way something could have been changed. Um, you can think about the change, but obviously that's just a projection of your thought. How you look back in the past and say, I should have changed this, obviously that's a projection on the past, even though the past has already happened, it's already had its representation through the circumstance. Doesn't mean the circumstance can't return to exactly how it happened, though it's already happened. The circumstance happened, but the thing that changed could be brought back to a similar state. So like I mentioned with the chopping off the arm thing, you could grow back exactly the same. That doesn't mean you didn't have your arm chopped off to begin with. I've mentioned that before. But like I was mentioning, there's no one way we can, that any of us has an effect. We're just the tools being moved around, and obviously the tools in the game is the only thing we can do. We can't blame the thing, the circumstance or the determinism or the cause and effect. All we can do is try to correct the mistakes once it's happened, even though that's to a certain extent an illusion beyond our control, of control beyond our control. Um, but the thing is we're victims of those things. We're victims of our circumstance. We can't blame the circumstance. We can't blame the determinism. All we can do is blame the tools, the things moving around, the victims, the tools of destruction, and the victims of destruction constantly, both at the same time. We are sentient beings. We're tools and we're victims of destruction. Since it's a zero-sum game in a deterministic universe, we're tools of destruction and victims of destruction. But I guess it balances out, right? We're both tools and victims. You get your just desert, you get what you deserve, even though you don't necessarily get what you deserve or get not what you deserve because you're a victim of the circumstance. But you get your just desert because you kill someone, you get killed, or you get punished, rightly so, justifiably so. But yeah, beyond that, we're just tools of destruction, and we're victims of destruction. We're going to be a victim of some kind of destruction, or we're going to be a tool of some kind of destruction in one way or another. And that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to be killing each other, and then we're going to be victims, and we're just going to create an endless chain of murder. But we're tools of destruction or victims of construction, because we all have an interaction with each other. And if there was just one person, they'd be their own victim of destruction, or the universe would be a victim of its own destruction. Whatever effect anyone had in the past can be a tool of destruction on a person living right now. But we're just the tools. We don't really have the effect, but we have the effect, but we're not responsible for the effect necessarily. We're partially responsible because we're the ones making the interaction. But we're beyond that. We're just victims of our circumstance based on previous things and an interaction in a chain going back to the beginning of time, which you can say was initially lit by some kind of initial reaction that happened right before it. Sort of like rolling a dice. Your hand shaking, how they fell out of your hand is the initial weight. The initial interaction, and yeah, that's how it works, I suppose. So yes, so yeah, we're just victims of this circumstantial anomaly that happened to be life on planet Earth, and all these millions of years that we've experienced this, not necessarily we, but speaking for every sentient thing, this interaction, this parasitism, cannibalism, interaction where we can do only so much to avoid any other outcome based on interactions with others. It's an illusion, because obviously even the effect that you have on no change is a change that you're creating, because you're making a choice. Making no choice is like making a choice. It's one of those things. Even though the balloon landed over here and popped and it had very little effect, there's always at least like a little gust of wind physically, but it still had an effect because it couldn't have landed over here. But then again, that's an illusion. It could have, but it didn't. And looking back, obviously, it wouldn't have any other way because that's the way it already happened. But just because that's the way it already happened doesn't mean that you can't change for what already happened and make things exactly the same or close, you know, hypothetically speaking, exactly the same. Your arm can theoretically, hypothetically regrow exactly the same, but that doesn't mean it still didn't happen. It still had its effect and it still had the value. The value isn't your arm existing. Your value is that you went through the pain of having your arm severed and it grew back the same. Yeah, the physicality of your arm remained the same. But that doesn't mean you didn't go through the value exchange of experiencing the negative experience of your arm being chopped off to begin with. So the value was felt, and that's the feelings. And the feeling of having no arm psychologically could have been a detriment, but then the arm grew back, and it's physically exactly the same. But physically up here, where the value comes from in our neurology and our brain, there was value. There was a value equation. There was something being felt, and that's exactly what I'm saying. That's what everyone's saying. I mean, really, this is pretty obvious, simple stuff. I mean, really. But yeah, there was a value exchange, and it's the feelings. And once it's already happened, that feeling effect has already made its stain on reality. It's already experienced. And now it's part of the existence, part of the interaction that finally leads nowhere in the end. But it's something that happens, and that's had its effect, and it's going to lead to something else happening. And it was already going to happen anyway, and there's no illusion beforehand. Your projection means nothing beforehand. I'm going to change this, and you think about, what are you going to do later in the day? I'm going to go change this thing, I'm going to do this and this. You know, obviously, it may end up doing them, regardless of if you end up doing them, how you end up doing whatever it is, and how consistent it is with the thoughts you may have had. That doesn't mean anything, because it was still just a projection in your mind, and it didn't show other than in your brain, which obviously is our psychology, which is really all we have. Which isn't saying it doesn't mean anything, but based on the events that actually occurred, it's still a projection in your mind. And same thing in the past. I can have changed this projection in your mind even though it already happened. And it's a projection in the future, and it's going to happen a certain way regardless. Regardless of your projection this way or the other way, and that interaction of projecting was part of the lead up into how the thing that you were projecting, the idea of projecting onto reality was going to happen. That it was part of the lead up to that thing that actually ends up happening. Because they don't correlate other than that it was here and you end up doing it here by physically interacting. Because they're completely disconnected. They're completely disconnected, but they have all the connection in the world. Disconnected because they're not relevant to each other because they're completely, this is a projection, this really happened. This really happened, but it's just a projection. It's a projection that really happened, and this is actually something that actually happened. You know, I actually go out and do it, it actually happened. And but they mean the same thing because they're in the same universe and reality, and it's me with the projection here, and it means everything, and they connect because I'm me doing the thing and me projecting, and it's in the same vessel kind of thing, kind of idea. So yeah, no one person has an effect. It's all just basic interaction, and you know, we're victims of our circumstance, and we do things based on the circumstance around us. So no one person has any impact, really. But we have all the impact because we're the tools, like I mentioned, and the victims of destruction, but we have none of the impact because we're just the tools and the victims. We're the ones carrying out the acts. We're the sentient ones being experienced and experiencing and causing experiences in others because of our interaction. But we're only victims of our circumstance based on a deterministic mechanism of circumstance controlling the outcome of the situation. So there's only so much we can do to change the circumstance. Because we're the ones being victims of it. Because everything else, regardless of there being another, like I mentioned, the balloon and the arm chopping up, it still already happened. It doesn't matter if it's over there, it's still an effect, the value already experienced. It doesn't matter if it goes back to the same way, it reverts back to the same thing, the value is already experienced. It has an effect regardless. Regardless, the value is experienced over here. It has an effect in everything. The illusion of choice, even though it wasn't going to happen any other way, the possibility of it happening any other way wasn't there. But beforehand it was there. But it still had an effect. Even if it's over here, even if it could have been over here, but that's not even realistic because it wasn't going to be over here because there's only one option and then what happened over there doesn't mean it still didn't have an effect. It has its effect regardless. Because if it happened over here, it would have been just as much of an effect as it happened over here. Hypothetically speaking, theoretically speaking, even though it wouldn't have happened any other way. It's still a thought experiment that shows that yes, even if it wasn't going to happen over here, the value that it landed over here and the effect that it had, or non-effect, is still an effect that it had because it could have landed here even though it wouldn't have landed here. So it's still a value equation that exists because it wouldn't have happened one way or another. And since it was going to happen one way or another, it shows it has its effect because determinism shows that it had value regardless, because something affected that at the very least, and that interaction, regardless of someone interacting with it or not, had an effect on something. You know, be it the person didn't see it, therefore that had an effect. They were expecting to see it, but they didn't see it, or whatever it may have been. The balloon popping over here, the effect was, but it still had an effect. The effect would have been something completely different otherwise. Sort of like not making a choice is like making a choice. One of those things, one of those thought experiments. I hope that made sense. That was kind of a roundabout way of saying it, but trying to get all the things out at the same time without confusing myself. Anyway, making sure I don't lose my train of thought. But I guess I made it clear enough. It still had an effect, and the value was experienced. You cut your arm off over here in this room, no one saw it or experienced it except you. Or the balloon popped, you know, sort of like the tree falling in the forest, it still fell, even if no one experienced it. So it's one of those things that the value was still experienced, it still happened. The tree landed on you, the value still happened on you, the tree still made a noise, even though no one else heard it, it didn't hurt it, there didn't need to be an individual, and it doesn't need to be up to every individual for that thing to have value. The value speaks for itself. Value is something that speaks, and it has its effect. It doesn't need someone else, it only needs the person to experience the value, because that's what's needed for value experience is the person experiencing value, a sentient being. And that's all it needs. It doesn't need anyone else for the value to be experienced or shown. It just needs to exist in a sentient being. And that's it. So, I think that's all I need to say. I think that's all I need to say. So, yeah. So, balloon pops over here. Doesn't matter if someone experienced it or not. It was still an effect, even though it was an illusion of effect that it could have happened somewhere else, because determinism speaks for it. Not only does determinism speak, that was going to happen a certain way regardless. It couldn't have happened this way, even though it couldn't have, proves that the effect that it could have had over here, that shows that it could have had, that were actually happened, had an effect as well. Because the effect, if it was caused by something, it's an effect of something. If it was caused by something, it's an effect. And if it's effect, it was causing something else, regardless. So if it was caused by something, it's going to cause something else. I mean, that's another simple way of looking at it. Even though it's over here and the balloon popped over here and it didn't cause all these other balloons to pop, it still was an effect because the balloons over here could have popped, and we can reasonably expect that to be the option. And if it was going to happen over here, there was going to be an effect over here. The effect is just different over here. It's just a different effect. It's not a no effect. It's a different effect. So we're all just victims of effects, regardless of the significance of them or not, because they're all significant because they're effects that were controlled by previous causes, and then they're going to be causes of something else. That's why it's just simple interaction more than cause and effect, because it's just a chain, unless you create a closed little experiment where you say, okay, this is the cause and this is the effect. But it was caused by you having the experiment to begin with, and so on and so forth. But then again, you just start getting into all the little nuances, and it just doesn't make sense at that point. So regardless, it just becomes pointless and frivolous to start discussing that then, because it just keeps on making a leading trail of going back and back further and further. It doesn't make any sense. But yeah, it gets too complicated. Not really. There's too many variables. Anyway, yeah, so that's all I need to say. If I have anything else to mention, sorry for another long video. Just want to make sure I get the point across thoroughly enough, make it worth my time. So anyway, thank you, and until next time. Bye.